Hey, welcome into another episode of the Fat Guy Podcast. I'm the Fat Guy. Most people just call me Brett. Thanks for listening to the show today. I was just looking as I was preparing to record today's episode. This is the 131st episode of the Fat Guy Podcast. 131 of these I've done. It's interesting, too, because when we started out, I didn't really know much about what I was doing. I think I started out when I had begun to try to go more vegan, and then I went whole food vegan, then I went raw vegan, then I went keto, then I started doing keto with intermittent fasting, and now we're what I would call extreme keto is the focus of the podcast now, which is maintaining or getting into your level of ketosis and calorie reduction via means of fasting, primarily and secondarily eating real, whole, natural foods that are just naturally ketogenic. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So when I have so many people ask me, I had somebody refer somebody to me today who didn't know anything about keto. And I tried to sum it up really quickly. I try to make it easy and quick to understand so that people could jump right in and it's not confusing. But I find that even using simple terms confuses people because we're just so far removed from the food process, we don't even understand food anymore. Like we just don't even, we're so far removed from food in today's society because everything comes off a store shelf. And so to us, anything that's on a store shelf is food. That's just, well, it was in the grocery store, so it's food. And that's just really not true. I'd say probably about a quarter of the grocery store is actual food. And the other 75% of the grocery store is pots and pans and quote unquote food-like products. They have food-like properties to them, but they're just not food. They're concoctions and creations manufactured in a lab somewhere in ways that you could never duplicate in your home. And so that whole conversation with this person today about keto inspired me to do today's podcast. So we're going to be talking about real food versus fake food or food-like products and why we're all so fat. And I know over the course of the 130 episodes I've done, I've listed several reasons why we're all fat. Pretty much every reason I've ever listed is true, some more than others. But it really boils down to a handful of things. One, we never stop eating. Americans and pretty much all of Western society never stops eating. We wake up eating. We eat in the middle of the day. We eat dinner. We eat the snacks. We go to bed, sleep for 6. Most people don't even sleep 8 hours. Most people sleep 6 hours or 7 hours or something. So your body gets a 6-hour respite from food, and then you're right back into eating again. And it's even more than that because in between the meals, if you're not snacking, you're usually drinking some kind of beverage that has 130 or 140 or 210 calories in it, which is still eating. Your body is constantly having to process calories and sugar, primarily sugar, but just calories, period. Your body just never gets a break. And it overwhelms the body, and metabolic syndrome happens, which is basically the precursor. Well, it is type 2 diabetes, but anything that leads up to type 2 diabetes could be classified as metabolic syndrome. So your body's just overwhelmed with food all the time, primarily sugar and carbs, but just food all the time. And you develop insulin resistance, and this exacerbates and gets more and more and more until you're pre-diabetic, then you're type 2 diabetic. And the next thing you know, you've reached a level so far that you die from some side effect of type 2 diabetes, whether it be, the high blood pressure that comes with it, or limb amputations, or wounds that won't heal, or heart attacks, or strokes, or Alzheimer's, or cancer. Pretty much all these things related to being metabolic diseases. So I would say that's the big thing. But the secondary thing is that very little of what we actually eat is food. Like we're not eating food. We eat stuff that we were raised up thinking was food, but it's not food. And you only have to go back to, the early to mid 1900s I don't know the exact decade, but I think it was somewhere in the 50s where the first TV dinners were made. Don't quote me on that, but somewhere in that time range. And that's where they learned that they could extract a lot of the fiber from foods, and then they could add a bunch of additives and preservatives and all kind of other chemicals to it, and they could have it where it'd stay in your freezer for months on end and not go bad. And once that started, the process was unleashed on America. And so you're thinking, well, I don't eat TV dinners. I don't buy frozen TV dinners. So I don't have to, well, it's progressed that was the beginning, but it's progressed even further from that. Pretty much everything on the interior store shelves, if it's in a box or a bag or a carton, it's just highly processed food, and it all follows the same formula. It's very hard for fat to be shelf stable. That's a very difficult thing to do. So they take most of the fat out, which is a good thing. You need good, healthy fats. So if it is something that had good, healthy fats in it, they take a lot of that out. They also were encouraged to do that because the government told us fat is bad, which they liked because it's hard to make fat shelf stable anyway. And so then you take the fiber out, because when you freeze fiber or you preserve fiber, it gets a weird quality. If you don't understand that, take an orange and put it in the freezer, and then take it out and let it thaw out and try to eat it. And you'll see it's all messed up because trying to extend the life of fiber is very difficult. So they take most or all the fiber out of the food, and then what do they replace it with so it tastes good then? Well, sugar. They just pile all kinds of sugar in it. And you may be looking on the label going, well, I don't see that much sugar. Well, then the sugar has 75 different names. So it could be anything from dextrose to, HFC to, there's just millions of names for sugar. So once you learn all the names for sugar and you go through an ingredient list of some of these foods, you'll see that sugar is listed in there like 8 different times under 8 different names. They got the high fructose corn syrup, then they got, brown sugar in there, and then they got dextrose in there, and, it's all these different kinds of sugars are in there. So those are the two things, really. Overeating, I've found from my journey of trying to figure out how to live and hopefully live the rest of my life better than I lived the first, 2/3 of my life. I don't even know how long we'll live, but I'm going to try to be optimistic about it. My goal is to learn and understand what it is that was wrong and try to make it as easy as possible to make it right. And so it really does seem very simple to me. And I know this from my own success and the success of others. And I try to follow all these successful people, and I follow a lot of podcasts of some really smart people who dive into the research. And so, I'm not just I had some guy message me about a week ago about fasting. He's like, fasting kills people, and you're encouraging people to do stuff that's going to kill them. Well, I try to often do the disclaimer that you should consult a doctor, even though most doctors are idiots in areas of nutrition, and especially where fasting or keto would be concerned. They may be brilliant in other ways, but I find in those ways they're usually at a deficit. But if you're a fat person, if you're carrying around a lot of fat, adipose tissue, you are not starving when you're fasting. You're just not starving. And so I'm not going to get into that, but it's just an example of, people think I'm just some guy who's trying to lose weight and doesn't know what he's talking about. If I shared with you the hours of research that I put in, it really would blow your mind. I don't do anything halfway. And ever since my mom got sick and I started researching nutrition for her, and then at the same time, I used that time to research nutrition for me, I would say it's probably easily 20 to 40 hours a week that I just invest in research. I'm fortunate enough that I sold my business, and then I also retired. And then I had some other things, and so that, having to be committed to working 8 to 10 hours a day is fortunately something I don't have to be concerned about. And so I have a lot of time to research things. Anyway, all that being said, let's dive into it. So real food versus fake or food-like things. And it's really not hard to tell the difference, honestly. Once you get past a couple of ingredients, if whatever you're buying has more than just a couple of ingredients, you have moved into this ain't food category, and your body doesn't know how to deal with it category, and it's going to be addictive, and it's going to cause cravings, and it's not going to provide you a lot of health, and you're just going to move into that area pretty quick. And so it's not that hard. So I thought, for example, I'd pick a couple of things, and I didn't want to pick horrible things, but at the same time, I wanted to pick things that pretty much everybody's familiar with and that we could all relate to. So I started with a simple one, which used to be one of my favorite things of all time. And there's kids, not only kids, but adults too, by the millions across the country eating this for breakfast every day. They wake up and shove this in their mouth within 30 minutes of waking up, which is the worst way to start the day. And I'm talking about Frosted Flakes. Okay? This is the ingredient list for Frosted Flakes. Milled corn, sugar, malt flavoring, high fructose corn syrup, salt, sodium ascorbate, ascorbic acid, niacinamide, iron, pyroxidine, hydrochloride, riboflavin, thiamine hydrochloride, vitamin A palmate, folic acid, BHT, vitamin B12, and vitamin D. Now, I know a lot of those things are sounding good, like, oh yeah, but they put the vitamin D in there, and they put some vitamin B in there. Well, first of all, there's a lot of research on this you can look at, but trying to add additives into something to make it healthy, it doesn't work, you know? And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to take milled up corn that's filled with sugar and high fructose corn syrup. Remember we talked earlier about the different kinds of names for sugar? Well, the second ingredient is sugar. The third ingredient is high fructose corn syrup. I mean, this is just milled corn and sugar is all it is. Then they had to put all kinds of preservatives and other things in there to make it stay on the shelf and not go bad. And then to try to make it look healthy, they added in some few vitamins and stuff. It's just garbage is what it is. It's just not food. And if you don't believe that, when I get to what actual food is, you'll see the difference pretty quickly. It's not rocket science. I was trying to think of other things that I could look up that people used a lot. And I don't know if you use this, but I know back when I was trying to cook, because I wasn't that good at cooking, I would do the hamburger helper things. I tried to pick the fastest out of all the hamburger helpers that I could find, I tried to pick the one that would probably be the healthiest. Not the triple bacon cheeseburger or the, whatever. I tried to pick the healthiest looking one, and the healthiest looking one that I could find is tomato basil penne. Now, this is the ingredient list. Enriched pasta wheat flour, niacin, ferrous sulfate, thiamine mononitrate, riboflavin, folic acid, sugar, cornstarch, maltodextrin, wheat flour, salt, tomato, monosodium glutamate, citric acid, paprika, vegetable oil blend, canola, soybean, sunflower oil, basil, natural flavor, spices, malic acid, caramel color, yellow lakes 5 and 6, yellow 5 and 6, red 40 lake, silicon dioxide, and yeast extract. I mean, there's so much I could say about all that stuff. First of all, there's like at least 3 different kinds of sugar in there. There's one that just says sugar, but there's 2 others beside that. Then they put the worst oils in there they can put, man. These high omega-6 oils that just destroy you from the inside out, that we were told was healthy for decades. It turns out that they were what's killing all of us. It's loaded with it. The canola oil, the soybean oil, that stuff is horrible. I could go on and on about this, but it's pretty easy to see that that's full of all kind of garbage. It's just not food. my last comparison I think I'll do is one with cheese, because when I talk to people about keto and they ask me can I eat cheese? I'm like, yeah, eat real cheese. And they're like, well, most people think cheese is cheese. And for most people, that means buying Kraft singles. That's what we've all enjoyed on our hamburgers for years. To us, that's cheese. Kraft wasn't even able, for a long time, was not even able to call Kraft cheese cheese. They had to call it processed something slices, they had to call it. And as I recall, and I could be wrong about this, but I think I'm accurate on the facts, they actually had to go through a lawsuit for the right to call it cheese. Because it had enough cheese in it. They argued that it had enough cheese in it that it was cheese. And so eventually they were able to call it cheese. But this is a Kraft cheese single, okay? This is the ingredients. Milk, cheddar, cheese culture, salt enzymes, whey, milk protein concentrate, milk fat, calcium phosphate, sodium phosphate, modified food starch, salt, whey protein concentrate, lactic acid, sodium citrate, annatto, paprika extract, natamycin, enzymes, cheese culture, and vitamin D3. That's a lot of stuff in there. That's a lot of stuff in there. And so if you're thinking, well, maybe that's just how they make cheese, I'm going to give you the ingredients of actual real cheese. This is real cheese. You just get them in slices too, and you can put it on your hamburger just the same. But real cheese, this is the ingredients you should see in real, whole, real cheese. Milk, salt, enzymes. That's basically it. You got to have the enzymes in there for the reaction to happen. Obviously, you got to have milk. Obviously, you want some salt in there. That's pretty much it. Now, some of the real cheeses may add something like a vegetable color to make it a certain color. That's pretty much the extent of what you'll find in real cheese. And it's just way different. Now, Kraft singles are so soft, and just if you bite into them, it'll stick to the roof of your mouth and stick all in your teeth. And real cheese is harder. It'll still melt. You can still put it on your hamburger patty and melt it, but when you're just eating it right out of the pack, it's going to be hard. Real cheese is hard. So those are just a few examples of what I call fake food. It isn't real food. It's stuff that we eat. It's a food-like product, but it isn't actual food. So what is food? And the reason I'm getting into this is because when I try to give somebody the one page, anybody can understand it, layout for how to eat keto or how to eat right, I tell them a couple of things. Look, this is the easiest thing I can tell you is to eat real food, pretty much any real food. Your only limitations are don't eat the starchy real foods. And what are the starchy real foods? So let's just start off with first what's real food, and then I'll finish with the starchies exclusions for those interested in the keto aspect of this. But if you go and get you some hamburger meat, right? The ingredients on a package of hamburger meat is ground beef. That's it. It's just beef that's ground up. That's all it is. There ain't no any of that other stuff I list. That's none of that's in there. Buy your ribeye steak. What's the ingredients in a ribeye steak? It's just a hunk of meat cut out of it's just the steak. That's all it is. It's just beef. It's 100% beef with bone, I guess. You're not going to eat the bone, so that doesn't matter, but it's, eggs. You buy eggs. What's the ingredients in eggs? The ingredients in eggs is eggs. It's just an egg. That's all it is. Lettuce. What's the ingredients in lettuce? It's just lettuce. What's the ingredients in broccoli? It's just broccoli. It's just one ingredient. It's just broccoli. That's all it is. It's a food that was grown and harvested and put in there on a shelf. I could go down the list forever. Spinach, cauliflower, asparagus. We've already talked about cheese. That's food. It's not hard to know what food is. Real food is basically just one ingredient. Now, what I will say is there are some basically whole foods that have a few ingredients, just very minor amounts of ingredients, and basically you could recreate this in your kitchen if you needed to. It's pretty easy to make cream, for example. You can whip up cream into butter. I actually watched a video on YouTube the other day. This woman, I didn't think it was possible. She bought heavy whipping cream, put it in a quart jar and put the lid on it and shook it for like 6 minutes and wound up with butter. Blew my mind. Because I was looking into making my own, what it would be to make my own butter. These are things that you can make. Butter is basically just heavy cream that's been churned or whipped up, and they add some salt in it if you get the salted variety. That's pretty much it. That's all the ingredients. You can find some, things like actual Greek yogurt, and you got to be careful. You can't buy the Greek style yogurt. Greek yogurt, you get a full cup container of that stuff. It's only going to have like 6-7 carbs in it total, maybe. Most of that yogurt that you see in there that people buy has got 25, 35, 45 carbs in it. It's just sugar is all it is. There are some things that have bacon, for example. I like uncured bacon. I think it's healthier for you. There's just naturally occurring nitrates in it. There's not nitrates added to it. But bacon is basically going to be bacon, salt, and then they're going to add such a minuscule amount of sugar to it that it just really doesn't matter. I know sugar isn't good, but you can look at the carb content of bacon and know that they really didn't add that much sugar in there. I mean, you have to, before you even get up to 1 carb, you have to eat like 5-6 pieces of bacon just to get it finally up to 1 carb. I mean, there's just really no sugar in there to speak of. But if you look at the ingredients, it's a couple of ingredients, 2-3 maybe. So there are some things on the shelf that you could get away with buying that have some ingredients in them that are still real food. A lot of those would be things like that you could make yourself. They've just mixed the ingredients together for you. But if you keep a lookout for them, they're not that hard to find. So non-keto real foods. Now these are real foods from nature that you probably want to not eat if you're trying to do keto. And these would be starchy and sugary. So the starchy would be carrots. The starchy would be potatoes. Any potato. Doesn't matter. Whether it's a russet bacon potato or a new potato or a, sweet potato. Doesn't matter. They're all just loaded up with carbs. And if you have a weight problem, which means you have metabolic syndrome, which means you're insulin resistant, your body can't deal with carbs, so you don't need to eat it. And then obviously fruits. They say eat fruits and vegetables. I like how the government started lumping fruits and vegetables in together. You know how they did that? Lobbying from the fruit manufacturers. They're like, come on, man, we need to get people eating fruits and vegetables. And then, ironically enough, fruits started becoming first in the list. It was vegetables before, and then you occasionally have some fruit as a treat or whatever. Then suddenly it just became, you need 7 servings a day of fruit and vegetables. Well, that literally means that your 7 servings a day of fruit and vegetables could be 7 different servings of fruit. You could have pineapple, you could have apples, you could have bananas, whatever, peaches. You'd just be eating sugar all day is what you'd be eating. Granted, you'd be getting some fiber and you'd be getting some nutrients. But if you're a person who is metabolically unhealthy and you have insulin resistance, and how do you have that? You got a belly, you got a gut, big belly gut, then that's you. That's what you have, insulin resistance. Your body doesn't handle carbs well anymore. You just can't be eating fruits like that. Now, there are some fruits that you can have very small amounts of that don't have a ton of carbs in them, and that would be primarily raspberries, strawberries, and then on the extreme end of that would be blueberries. But blueberries start to cross over a little line there. You just can't eat many of them, but you feel like you need to get some fruit in your life, have you a handful of raspberries a couple times a week, handful of strawberries a couple of times a week, and maybe half a handful of blueberries once a week or something. If you feel the need to get those in. Pretty much other than that, the fruit is out. Things like pasta, that's out. That's not a real whole food, but I'm just saying anything that's starchy or full of carbs like that is out. Bread, look at the ingredients in bread, man. Bread is not a whole food. It's not a real food. And not only that, they grind. If you were just to go out and pick you some wheat out of a field somewhere that wasn't GMO, if you could find you some legacy wheat from 500 years ago, which is nearly impossible to find anymore, and you just grab you some of it out of the field and husk it out and eat it like that, it wouldn't be that bad for you. But they grind it down and powder all the good stuff out of it to where all that's left is the worst. So much so that just like we talked about cereal, where they have to add the vitamin B back in and the vitamin A back, that's the same thing they do with bread. They pound out everything that's good out of it, and then they add some of the vitamin B back in. They add it in externally because they pounded all of it out and ground all of it out until it's just this powdery substance that your body just can't deal with. As a matter of fact, flour, in bread, when you make some bread or something like a biscuit or, whatever kind of bread you make or whatever, actually your body reacts worse to that than just eating straight sugar. You could take gram for gram the amount of carbs in straight sugar or the amount of carbs in bread. Your body will react worse to the bread. That's how bad flour is for you. So I hope that somehow opens your mind to what it is you should be eating, and it's really not hard. And so people ask me, look, this happened to me right before I went to Biloxi's. It was about 2 weeks ago. Somebody sent me a message and said, look, I'm not interested in intermittent fasting or keto or anything like that. I just want to eat food that will keep me from getting fat and help me lose some weight, but I still want to eat breakfast and lunch and dinner or whatever. And I replied to him, I said, it is possible. Your weight loss will be slower, but you just need to eat real food and you need to limit how much of it you eat. And still try to do some intermittent fasting. Try to at least make it 12 hours. So you eat between 6 and 6 in the daytime, and between 6 at night and 6 the next morning, you don't consume calories. That's pretty doable, right? That's not extreme. And then for breakfast, have real whole food. Have bacon and eggs with some butter for breakfast. For lunch, have you a piece of hamburger meat or a grilled pork chop or something with a vegetable. Use some broccoli and dip it in some butter, or some asparagus with butter brushed on it or whatever. And for dinner, same thing. Have you some hamburger meat, or cook that up right, or steak or chicken. Grill you up some chicken or bake you some chicken. Don't fry it in vegetable oil, for God's sake. But you can pan broil it or whatever. Chicken, and have you again some vegetables with it. Have you some broccoli and cauliflower. Have you some asparagus. Have a salad with it. Have a salad, and instead of, don't put a bunch of sugary dressing on top of it. You want a dressing, do you some vinegar with a little olive oil. Or you could do my new favorite salad dressing is just mayonnaise. I never thought it would be so amazing, but it is just straight up mayonnaise. How crazy is that? Get you some good mayonnaise, though. Get you some mayonnaise that's made out of olive oil, because you got a lot healthier oils in there. But I love that one. As far as some processed ones, most of the ranches are okay. Still, you don't want to eat more than a tablespoon and a half of them, but you can find some low-carb ranches, things like that, and try to be smart about it. So I hope this long, meandering podcast has helped simplify food. You want to update where I'm at personally? My goal was to go to Biloxi and not stress too much about food. Turns out I didn't stress at all about it. I'd say about day 3, I'm like, oh God, I'm going to do that thing where I gain between 10 and 15 pounds again on a week-long vacation. I'm happy to report that I did better than I thought. I didn't gain 10 to 15 pounds. I just gained a few pounds. So I was very happy about that. And I'm jumping right back into the intermittent fasting, 24-hour, 48-hour, 72-hour, and right back into eating a low-carb or keto, which is either 50 carbs or less a day or 20 carbs less a day, depending on how extreme I am about it. And how extreme I am about it depends on how many hours go between me eating. And if I go 3 days and I don't eat, then I'm fine with eating up to 50 carbs the day that I do eat. If I'm just doing some intermittent fasting, like 16-8 or 18-6 or 20-4, I'm going to keep the carbs really low. I'm going to keep it down to 20 or less. And I'm excited to be back on the train. I'm experiencing health conditions. I'm not going to lie about it. I find that I'm having some pulmonary issues. Not sure what's causing that. Seems like my lungs are getting fluid on them from time to time. I'm pretty sure it's just all the weight that I've gained and the lack of movement from the depression that I had, then the broken foot, which I was in bed forever, and just the lack of being active. So I'm back to being active again. Hoping that's going to help clear that up, combined with some weight gain and some fasting. I'm going to try to mix in some hardcore dry fasting, which is one of the most amazing healing things you can do. And dry fasting is where you don't consume anything, not even water. And there's remarkable healing properties with dry fasting. It's a little bit more dangerous. You got to be more careful. You definitely need to be fat if you're going to do dry fasting because your body can pull water from adipose tissue. It's called metabolic water. And so you can burn through fat, but you can also increase all these healing pathways. And so I'm hoping that that's going to help with my foot because I'm 16 weeks in, I think, with the broken foot, and it's just still not right. Even though the doctors tell me it's fine, they don't have to walk on it. So that's where I'm at, and I'm going to do a My Health update in an upcoming podcast, but that's not it's just a quick update for you. I really wanted to get in about the real food, fake food, and you'd be surprised. Like if you're one of the people going, "All this makes sense to me. Who doesn't understand this?" You'd be surprised people that don't understand it. I'd say especially younger people, anybody that's probably under 40 or under 35 or something. I mean, they don't know that there's a difference between real food. See, I had the benefit of when I grew up, we were poor. So when I grew up in the 70s, we grew a lot of what we eat. And so a lot of what we ate when I was younger was real food that we grew. We had a garden that had corn in it, had peas in it, had peppers in it, had butter beans in it, and greens. There was always greens. And then for a while, we raised our own meat as well. I remember when we had the hogs. I still remember the terrifying day. My dad called my uncle over, and they were out there castrating the hogs. And I was like, oh, my God. Then my dad had goats for a while, and goat meat is actually pretty good. So anyways, I grew up with seeing food actually grow. Actually working out there and picking it and harvesting it and bringing it in and stuff. And I would say a lot of younger kids don't know nothing about that. So when you think it's silly to think somebody don't know the difference between real food and frankenfood, you'd be surprised because there's a lot of people they just think all food is food. So I hope this podcast has helped you in some way. If it has, hey, rate us on the Apple podcast, Give us a 5-star. Give us a review. You don't know how much that would mean to me. And if you haven't subscribed to it, subscribe as well. I appreciate you so much. Follow us on social media. Fat Guy Podcast is the username, no matter if it's Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. Fat Guy Podcast. Follow us, and I'll talk to you soon.